It's a great question, Nick, and Ashok, before I turn it over to you, my answer to that in one aspect of it is that there hasn't been, there are a certain number of sort of institutional and structural impediments at the country level that prevent spreading of best practices. And let's use forests as an example, okay? RED is a good idea, and of course WWF and the Nature Conservancy and other non-advocacy members of the conservation community have been promoting debt for land swaps for a number of years now. But here, I'll give you an example. I've spent a lot of my career in the US, and this is one good example in terms of the US's advancement of conservation and business at the same time, putting together working forest transactions, okay? And a working forest transaction, and the reason I mention the words, I use the word institutional and governmental impediments is that you need to have the right tax structure in place in a country and the right regulatory structure in a country to have a working forest transaction work properly. Okay, it's a transaction where the Nature Conservancy will buy a huge tract of land. Okay, a forest that might otherwise be clear cut or might be otherwise be managed by a forest products business in a way that damages its biological values permanently. Okay, we'll buy it to protect it, but then we will sell it to a TIMO, a Timber Investment Management Organization, that agrees to the restrictions that we place on the property. And we put those restrictions on a property through what's called a conservation easement. It strips development rights and strips certain activity rights off of the property and has a legal basis for doing so, okay? So the TIMO buys the property for less than the Nature Conservancy buys it, or less than what WWF pays for it, okay? We will then turn around and sell the remaining value in the property to a governmental entity, okay, whether it's a state or whether it's the U.S. Department of Interior or the Park Service, so that the whole transaction has both an economic benefit in it to the TIMO, because it's not as if this forest is being removed from being productive in terms of forest product. It's just the opposite, but it's being put into a system that ensures its biological diversity, the value of its biological diversity, and ensures that it's managed in terms of the forest products in a sustainable way. But so you might then ask, well, why can't you do, as you just asked, why can't you do that everywhere? Well, the answer is that there are tax incentives for the TIMO and tax incentives for the Nature Conservancy as far as the overall transaction that work in the United States that haven't worked when we've tried to export that to other countries.
Well, you raise a very interesting point there, because I was intrigued why it was under the clean development mechanism of the Kyoto Protocol that there were CDM projects in renewable energy and fuel switching and other things kind of, big in Asia, starting to take off in Africa. But when you looked around, reforestation and afforestation under the CDM was just less than, I think, 1%. Anyway, this was like a year ago. The missing equation there seemed to be, when you really, really looked at it, was insurance. Because when you take the issue of pests and fire and other things that could happen to a forest that you're developing for carbon credits, where's the insurance sector? And the insurance sector apparently is absolutely brilliant at plantation forests, but they don't understand natural forests. Right, well, we're going to be one of the few sessions that's actually going to end on time. It's been a great pleasure to have my panelists with me here today. I think that there's a lot of provocative ideas that perhaps floated around on business and markets, etc. I think it's very true, certainly from the perspective of the United Nations Environment Programme. I've been there 9 years. I've never seen business coming more and more to us, seeking partnership, seeking in some cases in a sense of endorsement or a license to operate by wanting to know what they can do better in this world. So that is a very positive development. As for biodiversity, I totally agree. People really often don't understand it, and neither do, it's not just business, but it's also politicians. I do remember the former Deputy Prime Minister of the UK, who was also Secretary of State for the Environment, meeting him once, and he said this was a very interesting job as Secretary of State for the Environment, but when he was told he had to look after biodiversity, he said, "Why do I have to manage the country's washing powder?" So there's still a learning curve to go. But thank you very much indeed for being with us, and thank you very much for being in the audience.